Like his films, the music of Satyajit Ray is a unique, multi-layered blending of Western sense and Indian sensibility. His complete mastery of this art form is the culmination of a long family tradition.
I was born in a musical family. My grandfather, Upendra Kishore, was a composer, violinist. And on my mother's side, my mother's grandfather, Kalinaran Gupta, was a wonderful composer. And it so happens that on my mother's side, practically everyone is a natural singer. My grandmother could sing, and all her sisters could sing. My mother could sing. And my mother's sisters, brothers, and cousins were all natural singers. So I grew up in an atmosphere of music and singing, Rabindra Sangeet and Brahma Sangeet, right from my birth. I have been exposed to Western classical music from a very early age. There were some records of classical music in my house. I don't know where they came from, but I had heard Beethoven's works and some other Western music from when I was a small boy. I had a gramophone, a toy gramophone, and some small records given to me as a birthday present, which consisted of all of it was Western music, waltzes, marches, and all that. So Western music has never been unfamiliar to me. I was exposed to it, and I had heard it. Along with Bengali songs and Bengali music, I was listening to Western music of some kind or other. And it developed into a very serious interest when I was at school, towards the end, when I was 13, 14. I had a friend at school who came from a fairly well-to-do family, and he also got interested in Western music, and he started buying records, and it was in his house that I was able to listen to music of Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, and others. So I got initiated very, very early when I was at school. When other boys were writing poetry or reading poetry, I was listening to music, reading about it, going to the libraries because I couldn't afford to buy books, and reading about composers and compositions and musical forms. So it was a very early initiation. Well, this was at the time of trilogy. I had worked with Ravi Shankar.
In Pother Panchali, Song of the Little Road, Ray made a major breakthrough in Indian film music, not only by using the gifts of a classical composer like Ravi Shankar, but also by exploiting them from an essentially cinematic point of view. His collaboration with several classical composers in the next few films created a new idiom of film music in India.
On Jalsha Ghar, I had worked with Vilayat Khan, and on Baby, I had worked with Ali Akbar. But they had become very busy international composers. They were not always available when I needed them. And I didn't want to dictate other composer. So at the time of Teen Kanna in 1960, I think, I decided to try my own hand at composition. It was very difficult to start with, but eventually, in course of time, I managed to acquire some proficiency.
It was in Teen Kanna that Ray proved that as film music is one of the components of a film, a director of musical background is the fittest person to do the scoring for his film. From Teen Kanna onwards, Ray employed in each film a theme music to underline its central mood and to suggest a leitmotif in the multiplex structure of the film. An increasing stress on natural sounds, and particularly silence, and a sparing use of musical accompaniment are two important features of Ray's music.
Ideally, I think the director should be aware where music would be needed in his film. I'm talking of the ideal situation where it is assumed that the director knows about music, is conscious of music, and also knows where his films would call for music. But of course, the ideal situation doesn't always exist, and you have directors who have very little conception of music, where, of course, he has to depend entirely on the professional composers. And there you have to assume that the professional composer is a competent composer. But in my case, of course, since I've been aware of music from a very early age, and music has been my first love, even before the cinema, and since I do my own composition, I have very set ideas about where music should be used in a film.
Charulata, the most satisfying experience to Ray as a music director. Even the structure of the film, with its subtle inner links, is musical.
After the introduction of sound, in the very early days, there was no music in films. As you can see, if you see the films of early 1930s, there is often no music at all. But gradually, the system of background music came into being, and the professional composers emerged, and big orchestras emerged. And there was a period then, in the 40s or late 30s, when music, a film would be drowned in music. But even later, after that, of course, a kind of balance was struck, and music was used very, very discreetly. But also at the same time, certain conventions developed, like using a certain kind of music for happy situations, a certain kind of music for sad situations, another kind of music for situations of suspense, and these became formulas, and sometimes lazy composers would use these formulas rather than think those situations afresh. We naturally try to avoid these hackneyed formulas as much as possible, and I think all directors should avoid hackneyed formulas and consider a situation afresh and try to be original and avoid convention, avoid the worn-out convention. In my case, of course, I use now music less and less. And there are some directors in the West, as an example, Bergman, who hardly ever uses any music in his films. But we still do use music, partly because out of consideration for the audience, because sometimes the audience, we feel, the less intelligent audience would not be able to comprehend the moods, the changes in mood, and therefore we underline those changes, those moods, by means of background music. But even so, I would say that I use music as discreetly as possible.
Ray's musical genius finds its brilliant expression in the lyrics and tunes he composed for his films.
My first original lyric was written for Devi, but the tune was not my own. It was based on the conventional Ram Prasadi tune. The words were my own. But my first original song, both lyric and tune and orchestration, was for Chiriyakhana. This was the song Bhalobasha Tumi Ki Jano, which is supposed to occur in an old Bengali film. Then I got interested in writing songs and found an opportunity to write several songs when I decided to make a film of my grandfather's short story, Gopika. It became an elaborate musical film, and for it I wrote about 7 or 8 or 9 songs. I started by writing some of the songs. Even before I wrote the scenario, I imagined some of the situations that would occur in the film, and I wanted to find out whether I would be able to compose songs for the film. And I wrote 3 or 4 as a tryout. And when it turned out that they were quite satisfactory, I decided to make the film.
His latest experiment in music in Ghore Baire, Home and the World. Like Tagore in his songs and Ravi Shankar in his instrumental music, Ray has blended Western and Indian elements to create his own distinctive musical form, and he has succeeded where others have failed in the Indian cinema.
পঞ্চম দিলে ওখানে একটা ভাইব্রার কি নোট আছে দেখো নাম্বার 5 8 মাধবা ওই মধ্যমের উপর তোমার পঞ্চম পড়ে যাবে কি করে হবে হ্যাঁ কি কোথায় দিচ্ছ আমি নাম্বার 8 তো দেখছি আমি
There is no getting away from the fact that no other film director in India has demonstrated the same command of film music as Ray. Ray's music is imaginative, not melodramatic, balanced, not exuberant, functional, not decorative. It is music that grows from the film itself. It seems that Indian cinema is not prepared yet to adopt the language of Ray's music.
ঠিকই আছে 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 বাজিয়ে যাবে প্রত্যেকটা বিটে It has been my intention right from the beginning to work as an independent composer, not in opposition with other professional composers of music, but only for my own pleasure. I do it because I love doing it. I love composing songs. I love composing background music, and that is what I have been doing. There have been one or two exceptions. I worked for one or two other composers and other directors and other films, such as, well, for instance, Shakespeare Waller. But as a rule, and this is going to be a rule not only for now, but for future also, I shall work only for myself. And in the early days, I worked with, on music, I worked with professional, I wouldn't say professional composers, but professional musicians. I mean, I worked with Ravi Shankar on 4 of my films.
but they were essentially instrumentalists. They were performers, concert performers. They were not trained film composers, so that for instance, they were not trained to write music which would run for 2 minutes and 7 seconds and things like that, you see. So it was always a problem working, although they were very inventive. Ravi Shankar in particular devised some beautiful music for the trilogy, and I was very happy to use them. But the method that I used was that they would come, maybe just for a day or a couple of days. They would be, the rest of the time they were touring all over the world, if not all over India. And they would be available for, let us say, 2 days or 3 days, in which time they would probably have one look at the film, not even the whole film. For instance, Ravi Shankar saw only half of Pather Panchali. And they would write certain specific pieces. And the rest of the time, I was interested more in using their instruments. I was interested in Ravi Shankar's sitar. I was interested in Ali Akbar Sarod, and interested in certain ragas which I knew would fit certain situations. So I had them perform maybe for 3 minutes, 4 minutes at a stretch, various ragas in various moods and various tempos. And later on, it meant a tremendous lot of work in the cutting room for me, trying to fit the music with the scenes. So finally, in around 1960, at the time of Teen Kanna, I decided to do my own music.
Has the change or the variety of themes which you've adopted later been also a factor in this choice that you have to rely on your own music? In the earlier films, for example, you had more of a freedom, more of a going back into the romantic world of the village. And later on, you have been concerned with other forms and other sorts of experiences.
Yes, that is true, because more and more I felt that I needed, for instance, when you are doing a theme which is concerned with urban, the contemporary urban society, you can't use conventional classical Indian music instruments like the sitar and sarod. They just don't go with the theme. So I decided to use a combination of Western and Eastern instruments, and I had always been interested in Western music, and I was also familiar with the Western style of notation. So I decided, and since I was getting too many ideas of my own, it's not always very satisfactory to have to dictate great musicians like Vilayat Khan and Ali Akbar. And it threatened our friendship on a personal level, so I decided to do it on my own. And now more and more I use less and less music, I find, because I can use the mixing facilities have improved, and I can use a more creative soundtrack, whereby one can use actual sounds almost as you use music to suggest moods and things like that.
Would you give some instances, or maybe one instance of what you call this creative use of sound in your recent works? Something that has satisfied
for instance, in a city story, you can use, in a Calcutta story in John Arun, actually the city itself provided the noise of traffic and that sort of thing, and it's provided the sound, the mood building soundtrack, you know. I can't think of any specific examples offhand, but in Oshani Sanket, which one could well have used folk music in abundance, but I prefer to use bird noises, I prefer to use the sound of dhenki, you know, right, that sort of thing, and I prefer to use wind noises and other extraneous. I used one particular bird, the woodpecker, which I recorded. I was lucky to be able to record one. And it comes at a very crucial point when Moti dies, you know. At that point, when she's lying on the ground with her eyes, staring eyes, and hold the camera for about 5, 6, 7 seconds on that face, we can hear the woodpecker going, which is a very shrill, rather alarming kind of, rather eerie sort of sound. And I felt that use of music would sentimentalize the scene, so I decided to use this, which was also a realistic sound, as well as a kind of a stylization of sound.
Also at a certain level.
You have a great interest in music, and I believe you often compose the music for your own films.
Oh, well, nowadays I do. Ever since, which one was it? Two Daughters. ever since 61 I've been using.
What's the advantage in that? Is that because you get exactly what you want?
Yes, certainly. But you see, before that I worked with professionals like Ravi Shankar and two other virtuosos, Ali Akbar, but they are not film composers, really. They are brilliant virtuosos, and I wanted to use their particular playing of sitar or whatever instrument they may be playing. But it's difficult to tie them down to certain systems, certain methods, and they're not used to that.
Such as? Which methods are you talking about?
Well, you see, you describe a scene to them, and you give them a certain length of time, like a minute and a half. And in any case, they don't like to be dictated too much. And they were all good friends on a personal level, so I didn't want to jeopardize the friendship. So I finally decided to, since I couldn't find another composer to do the kind of thing that I wanted, I decided to teach myself.
And you also began to operate the camera.
Songs and singing a great deal, because my mother used to sing very well, and my aunt was quite a celebrated singer. She used to make records for HMV. And I remember very vividly my trip to the HMV, the Gramophone Company studios, and the first recording session which I attended, I think about 6, half or 7 at that time. They were before the electrical recording days. They used to have to sing in front of a horn. They were all English engineers. For some mysterious reason, there were some records of classical music in our house, although nobody was really interested. Western classical music, there was one movement of Beethoven's violin concerto. There was the usual things which I think even Bengalis bought them, violin records by Chrysler, songs by Shaliapin and things like that. Every sort of well-to-do or upper-class Bengali middle-class houses had some records of Western music. Violin was very popular as an instrument, so there would be records of Chrysler playing.
I can't say that Western music has directly influenced my approach to filmmaking. After all, music, any music, Western or Indian, is an abstract form, whereas film tells a story. So there's a basic difference between the two anyway. But there are certain forms of Western music which evolved in the late 18th century, which is the sonata form, which has a dramatic structure. You have this first subject, which is followed by a second subject. First subject, if it's masculine, the second subject may be feminine, you see. So there's already a contrast between the two. And then there's a development section which follows, where these two themes are combined and they play against each other, so that there's this conflict situation develops between the two themes. And then there's a recapitulation section, and then there's a conclusion section. So this is a dramatic form which Beethoven used, which Mozart used, where you already have something like the element of a story. What happens to these two subjects? How they go from key to key, and how they turn tragic by a change in key, and how they again then come back to the original form. So that is a vaguely dramatic structure which may have some relationship to the dramatic structure of a story, but not very much. It's superficial, it's not very close. But the question of rhythm, of tempo, of changes in mood, all these relate to film also, because the film, like music also, like Western composed music, exists as an inflexible pattern in time. Whereas in Indian music, as you know, it changes. With one musician can sing a rag for 1 hour, another can. You have a 3-minute record of a raga. So there you have more flexibility, whereas Western music, being composed music, is rigid. I think I was helped particularly in acquiring a sense of tempo and rhythm through my understanding and familiarity with Western music. And even when composing a film, let us say, these are at the back of your mind. I mean, that has to be there. But in actually composing the music for the film,
The real work is done at the very last stage, after the film is completely ready and I have all the footage that I need for the music. But stray ideas, little germs of themes may occur even when I'm working on the script. And then I would jot it down in my book for possible use at a later stage, or it may be abandoned and a new theme might emerge. But really the final work of composing the music comes at the very end, when the film is absolutely ready and when you have all the footage and when you know the structure of the film, how it moves, the rhythm of the film, the pace of the film, when you know that you have that right in front of you, then you really compose the music.
When he made the first film, I was hearing about it. He had so much problem to have finance. So it was many years later, I think it was end of 1950 or so, when he approached me for the first time and said, the film is complete. And he told me all the struggle that he went through, and he would very much like me to do the music for it. It was such a surprise for me because I never knew anything about his making films, which he has never done before. And I was completely, bowled over. Even seeing a rough rush, the effect was so strong, and I immediately got a tune which I thought would be ideal for the theme music, and I sang it for him. La da da dee, la da da, da da da.